I also want to acknowledge and welcome our wonderful legislators standing in solidarity with us, Senator McBride, Senator Lockman, Senator Pinckney, Representative Frank Cook, Representative Johnson, Representative Minor Brown, over behind my right shoulder, Councilwoman Darby, and State Treasurer Colleen Davis. Thank you. So today and throughout the weekend, Stand Against Racism events are being held at YWCAs across the country. Our shared mission is to eliminate racism and empower women. And while our specific actions may vary from YW to YW, we all stand united against injustice every day. And on this day, we amplify that unity with a collective call to action. Earlier this week, we saw justice in action with the conviction of the murderer of George Floyd, but there is still so much work to be done. Today we recognize in particular that structural racism is a fundamental cause of racial health inequities, and we call for public policy to align with public health for all people, not just some people. Social determinants of health, housing, education, income, employment, healthy neighborhoods, and access to quality health care have a major impact on physical and mental health. Racial disparities in each of these social determinants is well documented. Today, you will hear from our partners, leaders doing much of the grassroots advocacy work and community level engagement. YWCA's mission to eliminate racism is an immense challenge that can only be accomplished by listening to those communities that our partners represent, who are directly affected by the policies, procedures, and systems of racism. Join us in amplifying their voices and supporting their work. We stand against racism with Senator Tizzy Lockman, who today is, in addition to being a fierce advocate for social justice, will introduce a proclamation establishing April 22nd as Stand Against Racism Day. And again, I acknowledge our elected officials who stand united with us in solidarity today to recognize racism as a public health crisis. Later, I will have the pleasure to introduce Representative Mimi Minor Brown and Representative Kendra Johnson, whose resolution to the 151st Delaware General Assembly will recognize racism is a human rights and public health crisis. It is my pleasure now to introduce Eugene Lockman. I don't know, you can read into that what you need to. Let me try that again. Eugene Young, President of the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League. Thank you.
Oh, that was good. Yes. I never knew. Well, thank you so much for that. Good morning, everyone. That was not good enough. That wasn't good enough. This is one of my first times out being able to see, hug people, and just say hello. Okay, good morning, everyone. Today I want to start, I believe in starting the way that you want to finish. So with that, I'm going to start by giving thanks and saying thank you to the YWCA. Thank you to Stephanie. Please give them a round of applause. I also want to give a special thank you to Representative Kendra Johnson and also Representative Melissa Minor Brown for bringing this resolution together. You know, we've all personally, and include myself, I've seen some of the inequities around health. It's happened in my own family. There was actually an incident a few years ago when my father was stage 4 cancer, actually had to go to another hospital outside of our state because of issues that really threw him off, right? And threw my family off. And they did not even let me know till after he passed away, right? So you can see it's a serious issue. I can say it certainly impacted my family, but it also impacts us all from just some of the basic bare stats, right? The fact that the infant mortality rate is twice for Black women than their counterparts. The fact that black women who have a child are more likely to die when having that child during birthing process than their white counterparts. These are serious issues that we're dealing with. And that's why it's time for having such two amazing women such as Representative Johnson and Representative Melissa Minor Brown to bring this up as an issue. I always believe that, in order to deal with the problem, you first have to recognize that you have a problem, right? So if I'm going to deal with an issue that I want to tackle, I have to recognize that, I actually have an issue. Yeah. And I appreciate them for bringing this up as an issue that we have to put right in front of us, almost bringing the mirror to our face and being able to say, this is what we have to address. So now we can bring up solutions around that issue. You all with me? Yes. Just making sure.
Get it done.
Absolutely. That means, are you trying to kick me out of here? No, it's okay. It's okay. I'm done in about 40 seconds. I appreciate that. I'll say this. As a state, we here as Delawareans, we often pride ourselves with a variety of different things, right? We pride ourselves with, Delaware Joe, right? We pride ourselves with our beaches. Someone asks you, what makes Delaware such amazing? Hey, no sales tax, right? For me, I think what we really pride ourselves with, what we don't touch on enough, is the fact that our people are our greatest asset. Yes. The people of our state, which make up our state, are by far our greatest asset. And we have to recognize that this resolution brings forth this idea that we are bound together. If something happens to you, it happens to me. Something happens to me, it happens to you. And so I think this is a moment for us to recognize that we're all tied together in this. We'll sink together, or we'll rise to the occasion, right? And we'll swim together. But it all happens together. And so with that said, I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all again for being here. I want to thank the two representatives for bringing this up forward. And right now I have the absolute pleasure to bring to the microphone from the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, the Delaware chapter, Dr. Doris Griffin. Please give her an amazing round of applause.
Good morning, Delaware. Good morning. I'm Dr. Doris Griffin, and I am here to stand as a representative for the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, where Melanie Daniels serves as the president. Our organization exists to advocate on the behalf of Black women and girls to promote leadership development, gender equity in the areas of health, economic empowerment, and education. We stand with the YWCA today because we are unified by the mission. We are unified by our legislators and the proclamation. We support them. Our programming has indicated that we have already progressed in these areas and continue to stand shoulder by shoulder in order to push the vision even farther. We are providing financial literacy in the form of a boot camp. We are offering scholarships. We are doing mentorship through 100 Bridges. We are offering civic engagement training through the Mary Ann Shad Carey Margaret Rose Henry Civic Engagement Program. Oh yeah, we are training people to go out and do the work. Absolutely. But in the area of health specifically, thanks to Mr. COVID showing up, we have begun a series called Saving Our Sisters Beyond the Mask Initiative. This is an opportunity to provide resources and education to Black women and girls about overcoming and getting beyond COVID-19. Again, I say the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Delaware chapter stands in solidarity with our legislators today, as well as the YWCA. We are actively engaged in building stronger Black women and girls so that empowerment and wiser hands are available to steer the ship in the right direction for the days, the weeks, the months, and the years that are to follow. Yes, we are in the middle of a major health crisis, but the question is, are we ready for the healing? Are we ready for the healing? Yes, we can identify we have a problem, but the real answer, the real question that keeps marinating in my mind is, are we ready for the healing? There was a man that was ill that lay by a pond for 38 years, waiting for a healing, waiting for water in the pond to be stirred up so that he could be healed. When a master teacher asked him, do you want to be healed? The master teacher asked him that. The one that was laying in 38 years needing a healing couldn't give a direct answer. He gave every reason why he could not be healed. He didn't answer the specific question. Then the master teacher asked him again, do you want to be healed? And he said yes. And so the master teacher told him, pick up your bed, get up, pick up your bed, and walk. Well, Delawareans, today I say, if you really want to get healed, if we really want to be healed from this health crisis, then we're going to have to get up. We're going to have to align ourselves with one of these organizations, and we're going to have to do the work in order for the healing to manifest. It can happen, but we got to be willing to work together. I'm Dr. Doris Griffin, representing the National Coalition of 100 Black Women. We believe that this is going to take place when we work together. The next person up to speak is Mr. Stu Comstock-Gay from the Delaware Community Foundation. Please put your hands together as he comes to the microphone.
Thank you, Doris. Great, follow that. Huh? So, I am Stuart Comstock-Gay from the Delaware Community Foundation. We are a community foundation. We help philanthropists give money to support issues that matter, and our mission is to have a great quality of life for everybody in Delaware, to close the opportunity gap, and to address historic racial discrimination in this country. Grateful for the leadership of the YWCA and for the work of so many of you who are our partners, grantees, leaders, inspiration for all of us. And I want to say a few words specifically about health and race. 50% of our health outcomes are due to socioeconomic factors and to environmental factors. 50%. And if you consider that in a project we're involved with the Department of Public Health and the University of Delaware, it's called Healthy Communities of Delaware, we went out and we said, let's identify the communities with the worst outcomes in social determinants of health, measured by life expectancy, infant mortality, high school graduation, and child poverty. And there's a chart, you can see that on the Department of Public Health website. And almost uniformly, the communities that show the worst outcomes are communities of color up and down this state. It's not a surprise. But if indeed the factors that lead to those are historic race factors, are about racism, about inequality, then the healthcare system is not helping. The healthcare system is doing what it can to try to address this through formal systems, but the problem is we have to address it through formal systems because the system itself is not providing equal outcomes. It's a historical matter for all of us, and it's something that we all need to be working on. The point is, we have to overcome the historical discrimination in the health system, and we all have to be working on it. And we are pleased to be part of this effort, and pleased to be partners with the YWCA and with all of you. And with that, I get to introduce Cheyenne Miller, who is with Building People Power.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me here. I want to thank Representative Myra Brown and thank Representative Johnson for this resolution. I don't know if you all know, but for a number of years now we have been in a global pandemic. And I'm not sure if you guys know what I'm talking about, but I'm talking about racism. So the fact that we have some really clear, strong Black women leaders who are willing to dedicate the state's resources and time to recognizing this as a public health problem, recognizing racism as a public health problem, is amazing, and it's something that we need. And I just want to say, what's important is that we have to remember that when we're talking about racism as a public health problem, we are talking about things like education. We're talking about economics. We're talking about criminal justice reform. We're talking about housing. Y'all know I love housing. We're talking about health. And so I just want everyone to remember that when we talk about racism, we're not just talking about people throwing around epithets and saying mean things. We're talking about systems, institutionalized racism. And so with building people power, it's our effort to work against those 5 areas and racism in those 5 areas, because we know that if we don't, we will not see any changes here in Delaware. And you all know that my favorite thing is community organizing. And if we do not organize the communities that are most affected, the Black community, the Latino community, the Native American community, the Asian community here in Delaware, we will not see any changes in racism. And therefore, I'm calling for public solidarity across racial lines. And I'm calling for us to recognize that if we do not have any changes in this public health issue, that it will not just affect the communities of color that I just mentioned. It will affect the entire economy. Everyone will start to get sick. Everyone will start to be hurt. White people will be hurt when racism is not fixed. And so I appreciate the fact that we can all gather here today, and I want to call us all to be able to continue to gather in racial solidarity to handle this problem that we know has been plaguing our communities for a long time. Thank you all. I would like to bring Kobe Owens from the NAACP over to the podium.
How's everyone doing? Good. I just want to start off by saying thank you to the YW for allowing me to be here today and really pulling this coalition together. I want to take y'all back for a moment. Long before a white police officer killed George Floyd and sparked national-wide outrage, long before COVID-19 began killing minorities at twice the rate of our white counterparts, health experts, doctors were raising the alarms that systematic racism is itself a deadly pandemic, one that burdens Black and brown Americans with generational trauma, contributes to higher rates of infant mortality, heart disease, and even speeds up our aging process. Some people tend to think that racism is an individual thing. They believe that it's a one-off, one step. But in reality, they don't connect the 400 plus years of systematic legal racism that leads to the death of many Black and brown and minority communities across America. To put it simply, we can no longer look away from the reality of inaction, indifference, and institutional racism has harmed generations of minorities here in Delaware. For decades, advocates have recognized the impact of racism on minority communities. Individual and institutional racism drastically affects economic and social mobility, as well as physical and mental health of minorities. The outcries against racism have gone largely unheeded until now. That's why I see this resolution as a catalyst for other authorities to look at racism in a different light, for Delaware to begin to systematically dismantle the remaining pieces of Jim Crow practices that have discriminated against minorities here in Delaware. On behalf of the Delaware NAACP, we commend the work of Senator Lockman, Representative Melissa Minor Brown, and Representative Kendra Johnson for championing this legislation. And we applaud all members of the General Assembly who have expressed their support for such an important resolution. We stand with the YWCA and all our coalition partners, and I say this to Delaware: the time to end racism is now. The time is now to create change. And I'm happy to stand with y'all in this major step. Thank you, and I would like to bring up Marlene Saunders from the Southern Delaware Racial Justice Alliance. Doctor, sir.
Say amen, somebody.
Amen. This is like being home. I was raised at 8th and Walnut Street, right across from Gray's funeral home. So it's a pleasure to be back. I'm here on behalf of the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice. And we have a mission that includes educating, advocating for social and racial justice, and equality for everyone. The point that I want to make this morning is not to go over the data that describe how racism has kept African Americans on the outside, and how every institution in this country has placed this group in a marginalized status. We all know that. African Americans have known this for centuries. The point that I want to make is that while racism drives the inequalities that we see that are disproportionately represented in the Black community, it's driving division in the country. And it's also driving inequalities that white folks experience. So the point that we need to understand is that while there are special groups in this country who have immeasurably suffered from institutionalized racism, it is dividing the country, and it is hurting white folks as well. So for that reason, we all need to come together to break down the institutional barriers that hurt us all. And this meeting is very important because it represents organizing and coming together in an organized fashion. Those of you who remember Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture said, organize, organize, organize. Support the YWCA. Support the Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice. Support the coalition of 100 women. Do something in coalition with someone else to break down an illness that is dividing America. A country divided cannot stand. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Evelyn Brady, and I am here to say that Network Delaware stands against racism. We empower people to share their experiences, gather data, and recruit community members to advocate for legislation and engage in community organizing to break the cycle of systemic racism. How did I get here? I am a former elementary school teacher turned stay-at-home mom. But in November of 2016, I decided that voting was not enough. I began to get active by volunteering for candidates in Delaware, making phone calls, canvassing, knocking on doors, using my social media. That was great, but what else could I do? Well, I started hearing things like protecting the vote and voter suppression. But I live in Delaware. That's not a problem here. So I found the Department of Elections website. I found out that the Board of Election meetings were conference calls due to COVID. From listening on those calls, I learned about ivote.de.gov. I discovered the website designed to provide Delawareans with everything they need to know about voting in Delaware, and I had never heard of it before. In Delaware, we need to protect the vote by educating people about the process and how it can be made more accessible. I studied all things voting in Delaware. I attended the Board of Election meetings. I used my social media for voter education. I signed up to be a poll worker. My friends were calling me, asking me voting questions. I was a teacher again, educating Delawareans on where to go to learn all things voting. I was involved in ensuring the election of 2020 would be a success. So now what? I wanted to engage with voters regularly. I didn't want to wait until the next election year. Then I received an email from a friend about engaging now with organizations like Network Delaware in planning for 2022. Sounds like something I would be interested in, so I Googled it. and the first line of the website says, "Want to get involved but not sure where to start?" So I clicked the Click to Get Started tab. I am immediately met with an email from Drew asking me to meet with Cheyenne, who you heard earlier. And hey, there is a change agent journey meeting started. Would you like to join? Would you like to represent Network Delaware on the Delaware Voting Rights Coalition with the ACLU? Would you like to work with the League of Women Voters on redistricting and making sure it is a fair and transparent process? Would you like to meet with your state senator on behalf of Action for Delaware's Children? And would you like to represent Network Delaware at the YW Stand Against Racism event? It took me 4 years to feel like I am actually involved. And here I am today, speaking to you, coincidentally in the aftermath of a historic jury verdict that gives us hope that we are beginning to see a change. This was my journey. Yours may be different. You can do it, and we need you because it takes people to make change. We all have roles to play in this fight against racism in all its forms. There are members of our General Assembly who are here to listen and work with us to fix these sins of the past. Now is the time to stand against racism. We can all take part in big and small ways. We are all qualified to participate. And here we are to help you take a first step to begin to end systemic racism. And now I would like to introduce my friend from the Delaware Voting Rights Coalition and the ACLU of Delaware, Mr. Dwayne Benson.
Evelyn's going to get a couple more calls after that speech. I feel like an usher at a Beyonce concert. This is really exciting to be here. Thank you, YW. Good morning. My name is Dwayne Benson. I am speaking on behalf of the ACLU of Delaware. The ACLU of Delaware joins today with the YWCA and more than 24 other Delaware organizations in calling for racism to be formally recognized as a public health crisis. For the past century, the ACLU has fought for racial justice in legislatures and in the courts, including through several landmark Supreme Court cases. While the court has not always ruled in favor of racial justice, incremental wins throughout history have helped to chip away at different forms of racism, such as school segregation, racial bias in the criminal legal system, and marriage inequality. While these landmark victories initiated necessary reforms, they were only a starting point. Deep-seated systemic racism and inequities are still woven into the fabric of our institutions today. Systemic racism permeates the starkly segregated world of housing. In our public schools, students of color are too often confined to racially isolated, underfunded, and inferior programs. Our criminal justice system disproportionately targets and subjects people of color to police brutality, incarcerates them, and imposes numerous collateral consequences, and criminalizes poverty. The dream of equal justice remains an elusive one. More than anything, doing this work has taught the ACLU that we must fight on every front in order to overcome our country's legacies of racism. We thank Representatives Minor Brown and Johnson for the House Concurrent Resolution recognizing that racism is a human rights and public health crisis. The resolution points to the pervasive discrimination and disparities in housing, education, employment, criminal justice, and other facets of life to explain stark differences in health outcomes across racial lines, a claim backed up by more than 100 studies, which have linked racism to worse health outcomes. In the first state, Black Delawareans have an infant mortality rate that is approximately 2.5 times that of white children. The homicide rate for Black men is 7 times higher than for white men, and the death rate for HIV/AIDS is still 11 times higher for Black Delawareans than white Delawareans. This resolution also comes as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to disproportionately impact Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities in Delaware and across the country. The deep racial injustice that pervades our society has proven to be devastatingly harmful to the health of Black and brown people. Problems like inadequate access to health care, poverty, police violence, financial distress, and housing insecurity all stem from systemic racism and oppression, and they culminate in chronically worse health outcomes for Delawareans of color. We must accept the reality that racism is deadly to human health, and we must take immediate steps to confront and address these disparities. Today's stand against racism is a critical first step in recognizing that racism is a public health crisis. The ACLU of Delaware stands in solidarity with this effort to work for racial justice and raise awareness about the impact of institutional and structural racism. It's now my pleasure to introduce my friend, Council Member Shanae Darby of Black Mothers in Power.
Well, first, again, my name is Shanae Darby, and I just want to say to be a black woman is to be born a black woman is to naturally be an activist, is to naturally be an organizer. And I don't have a fancy speech for y'all today. This week has been a hard week for me personally. We had the verdict of George Floyd. We couldn't breathe for 2 minutes. And Ma'Khia Bryant in Ohio, a black girl was killed. No one wants to mention her name, but I'm saying her name today because to be a black girl is to have a heavy weight on you. It's a burden and a blessing, right? And I come here today also as your 2nd District City Council person, and I ran because I really wanted to make a difference in the black and brown communities here, and to see the clear inequities in our city and how money is invested, to see a clear disparities that exist in our city, to see the clear lack of voice for that is the reason why I am here. And I know that our city has been impacted by historical racism, structural racism, and then even today, some policies that are put in place to further keep racism going in our city. And I'm also here today as Black Mothers in Power. It's a nonprofit focused on addressing the infant mortality rate here in the state of Delaware. And Eugene stole my line. But black mothers are 2 to 3 times more likely, and black babies are 2 to 3 times more likely to die, right? And that hits me. And it hits me hard because when you look at the data and the statistics in Delaware, it says black women in the city of Wilmington, black babies in the city of Wilmington are more likely to die than anyone else in this state. I am a black woman. I was born in the city of Wilmington. I have 3 black girls. That puts a fire in me. Yeah. I don't think I understand. Like, it puts a fire in me. I do not want my 3 black girls to face the same disparities I have to face. And I think about the future, my legacy. People I don't even know, I love them. Like, I don't even know these people who my great-great-grandkids are going to be, but I hope 100 years from now they'll be like, my grandma Darby was lit, you know? So, and I think about these things, and when I see these disparities, I am a mixture of everything. I'm angry. But I'm trying to take this anger and this passion and put it into something positive to try to make a difference for the state of Delaware, for black women, for all women who are affected by maternal care. So one of our key things that we're focused on is community awareness. So how do we build this knowledge up in our community amongst other black women? Because it's so important that we're crossing social economic lines, because this is not a poor black woman thing. I don't have to get social service benefits for this to affect me. I don't have to face live in poverty. I can be a black woman with a master's degree and still be faced with this disparity. Right? I can't master my degree way out of this. I can't go to Temple. I went to Temple and get my master's degree and it's okay for me. I cannot do that. There's nothing I could do, but I was born black, and these disparities are going to face me. You're going to be the black woman doctor at the hospital, and you still, as we have this year, already had a black woman at a national level who passed away giving birth. So this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And another important piece, this year our focus is community programming. We got a grant to do a doula training program. We trained 10 black women to be doulas for the state of Delaware. And when I went into the training room, and I am not a crybaby, so I cried when I left there, and I'm crying because I was like, when I was 18, 19, and I found out I was pregnant, I needed all of them black women in that room, and I didn't have them. I needed them, and I did not have them. And I hope other black girls and other black women can get the support that they need. during their maternal process and postpartum process. And then I just want to close off with our community organizing work. We're trying to get some legislation passed, working with the General Assembly. Thank you guys from down there. A lot of people support Black maternal health care down there and the initiatives that we want to see. We really want to see Medicaid and private insurance reimbursement for doula services, right? We want to make sure that across all social economic lines that everyone who has insurance has access to doula care. And the second thing we want to focus on is racism and implicit bias training for healthcare providers and staff. It is so key that we're addressing the embedded racism against Black women. We can talk about Black people, but today, right now, I'm talking about Black women. From us having to breastfeed other people's children, right? And the effects that had on us, because breastfeeding is a generational knowledge, and that was cut off from us. Right? And also thinking about the gynecology, right? The science of gynecology today exists because they experimented on Black women. That's right. And I feel that today because genetically that stuff passed down and you feel it. I feel it. Like I feel the hurt, the anger, I hear the cries, I can't even imagine the pain, right? So I think about these things and the embedded racism in our country where they use science to justify us to not being human. So we had to address those thoughts that still exist here today in our healthcare system to be able to save Black women, to be able to save Black babies. And I just want to say I stand here today. Thank you to General Assembly for doing this. And again, my name is Sinead Darby, and thank you guys.
Thank you to Councilwoman Darby and for the testimony of all of our leaders today. I also want to take a minute to thank my colleague Becca Cotto, who organized today's event. Many of you know her very well. Thank you, Becca. So at this time, I'd like to invite the Honorable Mimi Minor Brown and the Honorable Kendra Johnson to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. Just give me a moment while I actually get into my phone. 1 second, sorry. And since I have mittens on, it's really difficult. We'll take my mittens off, how about that? Yes, I have on mittens. Good morning, everyone. I am Representative Kendra Johnson. I represent the 5th District here in Delaware. On behalf of Delaware's Black Legislative Caucus, I bring you greetings. Our members of the Delaware Legislative Black Caucus include myself, Kendra Johnson, as the chair. Our vice chair is Representative Nnamdi Chukwucha. Other members include Representative Larry Lambert, Representative Ray Moore, Representative Medina Wilson Anton, and of course, standing to the right of me, Representative Melissa Minor Brown. And additionally, we have Representative Frank Cook, who is in the House. Thank you, sir. Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker, our founder. The Representative Stephanie T. Bolden. Also, Senator Marie Pinckney, Senator Darius Brown, as well as Senator Tizzy Lockman, and most of them were here with us today. I wanted to start off just by giving you a little bit of information before we go into the resolution. What you need to know is this. This resolution was the collaborative effort of genius minds. And what does that mean? The genius minds of the Health and Welfare Subcommittee of the African American Task Force, which is a part of Delaware Legislative Black Caucus's Justice for All agenda. And we actually have some of our members here today. So what I'd like to do is give them all a shout out as well. While Representative Minor Brown and I stand here to read this to you, you need to know that this was a collaborative effort. No individual does anything alone, and we are so very happy to have had the opportunity to work with them for many months to create an amazing document with so many salient points. Our members include State Treasurer Colleen Davis, Nikisha Williams-Bailey, Keith Hunt, Forrest Whitaker, Watson, thank you, Cassandra Coates Johnson, Dr. Debbie Harrington, Simone Philpotts, Dr. Eleanor Kiesel, Dr. Carmen Jordan Cox, who's in the house with us today, Ray Jones Avery, our state auditor Kathy McGinnis, Lucretia Young, as well as Representative Larry Lambert, myself, and Representative Melissa Minor Brown. So I thought I would share that information with you first before we get started. Thank you all for your attention.
Good afternoon, everyone. Rep. Johnson and I, we came here to read the resolution, but we can't read this resolution until we speak about it. So last minute, I thought I have to just say a few words because this resolution is huge. And thank you to all the speakers that came before us reading this resolution. This resolution wasn't Googled. We didn't Google a resolution that we would bring forth that wouldn't really be tangible, but it would be just enough to get passed through our state. Every subcommittee member put a piece of their own on this resolution, from life experiences, from historical events, from what they just felt in their hearts needed to be included in this resolution. This is real. So thank you to the subcommittee members for that. We can't bring forth policy to change what's going on in our state until our state takes accountability for what's going on today. And for the last year, we have been at such a civil unrest in our state. And really, it goes beyond that year. Kobe Owens said it. It started centuries ago. It didn't just start last year. But for the last 2 weeks, I know a lot of us sat and we watched the trial of Derek Chauvin, sat there on edge. I don't know about you guys, but I couldn't be optimistic. I couldn't be optimistic. And then I sat this week and I watched the verdict. And as I sat and watched it, I cried. I didn't even know why I was crying. And I asked myself, why are you crying? Are you happy? Are you sad? I don't even know what these tears mean. And then Ma'Khia Bryant. And then I knew why I was crying. Because this isn't really a victory, and nothing has changed. And I sit there and I watch the trial, I hear the verdict. I try to explain to my 7-year-old son that all cops aren't bad. All white people aren't racist. That's what I'm trying to explain to my son. And as I have those conversations, I get a call from my best friend who's pregnant, who lost her baby 2 years ago due to the neglect and negligence of her doctor because he did not address her concerns. They say black women carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. But let's not forget about our black men. Because our black men carry that same weight, but they're not acknowledged for it. They're ripped from their homes. They're torn, their dignity is torn from them. So when we talk about black women, let's not forget about our black men. I'm serious, don't forget about our black men. And I thank my husband for being here because you hear my cries every single day. I talk to my 70-year-old aunt on the phone and I say, Aunt Sandy, when is this going to change? I'm tired. And she says, one day, Melissa, you got to have hope. One day it's going to change. Better days to come. Tomorrow's a better day. And I'm tired of hearing that. I want it today. I don't want it one day. I don't want it tomorrow. Today I want my children to be valued for the beautiful black human beings that they are. Amen. Today I want to be valued as the beautiful black woman that I am. I want to be considered for that job that I studied for and gained the credentials for over the white woman who doesn't have those credentials. But she gets the job. And that's real. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it. And I'm tired of waiting.
And I'm tired of hearing slow down. And I'm tired of hearing sit down. And I'm tired of hearing wait your turn. And I'm tired of hearing better days to come. I'm tired of it. And in order for us to really get somewhere, we have to take a stand and we have to take accountability. And this state has to take accountability for it. And we're not going to ask for it. We're going to demand that it gets done. So that's why this resolution is so important. Because this sets the tone for better days to come. So thank you everyone who's here to hear this resolution. But we can't stop with just this resolution. This sets the tone. We do our part. And we hold people accountable. And we get it done. So Representative Johnson and I are going to read this resolution. And it's deep. But bear with us. Whereas racism is a social system in many dimensions that act on systemic, institutional, and interpersonal levels, and is a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based upon the social interpretation of the color of one's skin. And whereas racism has been laid into the foundation of all institutions in the United States, every institution has been impacted by racism and its effects continue through today. Denial and the colorblind facade have provided elusive cover. We as a nation have never corporately nor genuinely confronted racism and the people it continues to impact, notwithstanding the Civil War.
Whereas racism unfairly disadvantages specific individuals and communities, while unfairly giving advantages to other individuals and communities. Whereas the negative repercussions of historical racism, including but not limited to Jim Crow laws, discriminatory lending practices of the 20th century known as redlining, and the current limitations and access to healthy, nutritious food and appropriate health care have lowered educational employment and housing opportunities, increased rates of lead poisoning, limiting access to clean water, and created other negative environmental impacts, increased rates of infant mortality, and reduced the life expectancy of people of color. And whereas financial discrimination, injustice, and trauma have created a significant wealth gap for Black American families, demonstrated by the 2019 Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finance, which revealed the typical white family has 8 times the wealth of the typical Black family, including a median white-Black wealth holding gap of $164,100. Additionally, the typical Black family has $2,000 or less in liquid savings compared to their white counterparts. Only 14% of Black families have enough savings to cover 6 months of expenses, and that among working-age families that have retirement account balances. The typical Black family has 2.5 times less saved than their white counterparts. Whereas racism causes persistent discrimination and disparate outcomes in many areas of life, including housing, education, employment, criminal justice, and health care, and results in disproportionately higher rates of homelessness, incarceration, poor education, poorer health outcomes, and economic hardships. And whereas alarming findings show that Black Americans are dying from COVID at a much higher rate compared to white Americans, in part due to long-standing, unaddressed health disparities, as well as systematic racism and other social economic inequities.
Whereas research demonstrates that racism itself is a social determinant of health and results in disproportionately higher rates of chronic disease, mortality, poverty, economic distress, and the adverse effects of health outcomes for African Americans and other racial minorities are widely recognized and documented, yet continue to persist through the United States. And whereas disparities in health outcomes are exacerbated for LGBTQIA and people of color, and whereas disparities in health outcomes are worsened for people of color with disabilities due to bias and inequitable access to health care.
Whereas researchers have developed the analytical framework of weathering to describe how the constant stress of racism leads to poor health outcomes for Black Americans, and whereas the daily experience of racism is associated with stress, depression, anxiety, and may cause physiological reactivity or contribute to chronic health conditions, and whereas racism is linked to mental health challenges for children and adolescents, and whereas Black people in the United States are 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white people in the United States. The police violence is the 6th leading cause of death for our young Black men.
Whereas the police brutality and violence experienced by Black people in the United States adversely impacts mental health among Black communities. Whereas the obvious and disparate treatment by police to deploy pepper balls, smoke canisters, shields, and batons on peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters throughout the summer is in stark contrast to their response, or lack thereof, to the deadly, armed, and violent white mob during the attack and desecration of the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. That's the latest example of the racial dichotomy that exists in America with the treatment of Black and brown communities.
Now, therefore, be it resolved by the 151st General Assembly of the State of Delaware, the Senate concurring therein, declares that racism in our country is a public health crisis. And condemns police brutality, calls on the state of Delaware to take a stand against racism, and calls for continued sound and anti-racist policies that address health disparities, systematic racism, social, economic inequalities, and other barriers that continue to hinder African Americans in this state. Thank you.
So I am humbled and honored to stand with you today and to stand with all of our leaders and all of our speakers today. And I'm humbled and honored that you stand with us as well. So thank you to everyone who came out today to stand against racism. Thank you to everyone who has joined us virtually for doing the same. In closing, while designations are a critically important first step to name the problem, to acknowledge the problem, to demand a solution, alone it is not enough. There must be action that follows, and that's where we all come in. And listening to the voices of our partners who represent communities affected by systemic racism, who suffer disproportionately from negative health outcomes and from inequality in social determinants of health. We hope that you leave today inspired to amplify their voices and to take action. YWCA is on a mission to eliminate racism, empower women, stand up for social justice, help families, and strengthen communities. We won't stop until justice just is. Thank you.